I mean, I think the beginning of it really is that it's generational as much as it's racial. It's generational. And we're in a time in which 4 generations, in essence, are occupying the planet or America at the exact same time. You got the baby boomer generation who's president and running for president, my generation, then you got millennials, and then, I mean, my boys just turned 20. So now they're coming into their adulthood. And I was just having a conversation with my sons just before I came down. And I was saying to them that a part of the challenge is that our freedom, the rights of African Americans in America, is just not that old. I was born in 1968. The Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863. That's 100 years. So 100 years before my birth, my father was raised during segregation. I've heard my father and my uncle tell stories of how my dad's younger brother is very, very fair-skinned. So when they were kids, he could pass. So he could drink from white water fountains. He could go to white bathrooms. My father could not. My father was too brown, too dark. So we are talking about people I knew. We are talking about conversations that I had with people who, my great-grandmother was the daughter of a slave. I knew my great-grandmother. I had a relationship with her. So the truth of the matter is that a part of what is happening right now is our freedom, our rights, our place in American culture is still growing. It's still becoming. One of the things that's very encouraging to me, and I know that some of what I have been speaking and talking about has been about Black people's ability to come together and our unity. And that is something that is important for us to analyze because we are a minority. And any minority has got to be united to have power. But when I talk to my sons, and I listen to not just millennials, but this new generation, when we're looking at the protests right now, I mean, there are as many, if not more, young white people protesting even than Black people are protesting. So as much as there's a part of me, and I said this to my son today, I said that there's a part of this that is my generation's fault. I was watching a video today of a young white girl basically arguing with her parents. Her parents are probably my age. And her parents were just speaking their white generational ignorance. And the girl is saying to them, that's racist. What you're saying is racist. And I said to my son, part of this is my fault. Part of this is our generation's fault. My generation in particular, the Xer generation, we're just a cynical generation. So we just got to a point where we just were like the Jesse Jacksons and where is the civil rights leadership from my generation? Jesse Jackson's a boomer. Al Sharpton's a boomer. These guys are older. My generation was like, look, we're gonna go to school. We're gonna work. We're gonna get hours. We're just not. We don't even know if we really believe that much that we can ever really be equal. And so now here we have my children's generation is very angry and very upset, and rightly so. But a part of that is because of their expectation for better, their expectation for the country to be better, their expectation for white people to be better. And for someone like me, it's not embarrassing, but it's challenging. It makes me say, yeah, you guys are right. That we should expect more. I just haven't. I had enough experiences and I had enough interactions with white people that I got to a point where I was just like, yeah, so I'm just gonna just do me. And I'm gonna raise my family and I'm gonna raise my children and I'm going to be careful. I'm not gonna jog through white neighborhoods. That's not anything I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do everything in my power to stay out of the face of the police as best I can. I'm gonna deal with the reality that is racism, and I'm gonna stay out of trouble. And I'm gonna say, sir, yes, sir, and I'm gonna move real slow, and I'll step and fetch it if I have to, because I wanna stay alive. The anger of the protest of even right now, when I'm seeing like young black men who are still being arrested right now, a part of their defiance is based on their expectation for better or for more or for greater. And I don't know if my generation really expects that all that much. So I think that, right now, a part of what we're seeing is even more than just this battle racially. We're looking at a battle generationally. We're looking at a battle of older generational thought versus younger, more enlightened generational thought. Now, I was having a conversation yesterday with one of my spiritual sons who's in this house and eats my food and who's basically like a son to me. He's white and he's married to a black woman and he's just a part of our family. I mean, just a great guy. I love the kid. I love him. And it's very interesting when you see white people who really love black people, they get very upset about racism, like violently, emotionally upset. So he loves his wife who's black. He loves us, his family that's black. So he's very upset. He's even more upset, as upset as we are. He's even more upset. And maybe that's not even fair. Maybe that's a part of what we're seeing with this generation, because these white kids love Jay-Z. These white kids love Beyonce. These white kids, they love Jamie Foxx. These white kids, they love Drake. They're like, what are you talking about? They love LeBron James. They were really upset when Kobe Bryant died. So there's a love, there's a passion there. But anyway, we were talking about his father. So he called me to talk to me about his father. Now, I said to him, after he finished, I just said, look, man, your dad's 60. You may be expecting something from him that he just doesn't have it to give. He's born and raised in rural North Carolina. My father's 74. There are some things my father thinks that aren't the best way to think. And he's black. My father's mother, my grandmother, she used to pinch my nose. She used to push my bottom lip. She wanted you to keep your lips stiff. She didn't want your nose too thick. She was black. It's the way they were raised. When we would leave her house, see my grandparents, my father would be like, it wasn't dismissive, but it was just kind of like, that's my mother, ain't nothing wrong with your nose. it wasn't this whole horrible thing. It was just, this son of mine is thinking, oh my God, is my dad going to be able to be around my children? How is he going to be with his grandchildren? And I'm saying to him, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Because once he sees his son's face but black, he'll change. I mean, think about it. A part of what makes African Americans divided within ourselves, because we were taught and raised to even be divided and to be against one another based on our color. And a part of the reason why that was because the first black people to be educated or to be freed were lighter black people, and that's because they were the children of the master. So if a slave owner sees his face in a child that he had with a slave, and that makes him look more kindly and is okay about his child being taught to read and his child being freed, the first black people that could read and the first black people that were freed and the first black people that had wealth were lighter black people. So my point to my son was, hey man, believe me, if a slave owner can have a different attitude towards his slaves because they're his children, then your father's going to be okay with your children. But even if your father was black, even if you were black and your father was black, there still may be some thought generationally that you would have to say to your kid, yeah, that's your grandmother. It's the way she sees the world. And I'm not saying this to excuse it. I think that what bothers us is when wrong is pointed out. There's like an argument against, as if the way that they see it is the way it is supposed to be seen. But I think that we have to keep in mind that as much as I was born 100 years after slavery was over, so were they. So we're expecting white people who are a couple of generations out of owning us to see us as equal. And if I sound sympathetic to them, I'm not sympathetic. I'm just trying to get us all to get some clarity and understand that, no, we have a ways to go. We can't be that surprised that whether we're talking about governmental leadership or judges or even spiritual leadership, the silence of the evangelical right is they think it's steeped in Christianity, but it is ultimately steeped in racism. But how hard is that for us to fathom? Considering the fact that almost any racial supremacist thought is founded in some kind of religious perspective. Almost any. It's a belief in some kind of divine design, and people start throwing around Ham, and it's just so I think that we're asking something of white leadership that shame on them for not having it, but some of it has to do with their generation. So, I mean, I was talking to my sons the other day about unity. And let's talk about something like a union that employees have at a company. So let's say that you have a company that's making $50 million a year and they're only paying their employees $1 million. Those employees unionize and say, hey, that's not fair. We want better pay. We want better insurance. We want better benefits. And if we don't get it, you guys are going to have to give us more than $1 million of the 50 you're making every year. We want at least a tenth. So we want you guys to up it. We want pensions and we want retirement plans. And these are our demands. If the company is not sensitive enough, then the employees unionize. Then they have a rep that meets with management and says, this is the employees' demands. If those demands are not met, then that union group decides to go on strike. They picket because they're trying to say, you're not going to make any money. What the companies do at times is try to hire other people to do their job. It's one of the reasons why Michael Jordan stopped playing baseball, is because he wasn't going to cross a picket line. When the baseball players union came together and demanded certain things, there are people who are like, okay, if you cross our picket line, you're a scab. Because what you're doing is you're making it easy for this company to not give me what I'm owed. Martina Navratilova, who was really a champion of gay rights, came out and made a statement about transgender athletes competing against female athletes. Martina Navratilova was a female athlete. She still is a female athlete. One of the greatest female athletes in the history of the country. One of the greatest female tennis players ever. And her points were valid. She was making them in the interest of trying to save female athletics. She just doesn't think it's fair for women-born women to compete against women-born men who transgendered into women. She doesn't think it's fair for them to compete in sports together. And the LGBTQ community slammed her. So she almost was surprised by it. Her attitude was like, wait a minute, y'all. I'm the one that made your movement even possible. I made a stand back when nobody was making a stand. I came out the closet before people came out the closet. While y'all was still in a closet rubbing on each other, I came out. I lost endorsement dollars. I had to answer questions. I'm one of the pioneers and leaders of this movement. How dare you censor me? How dare you slam me? But their statement was, listen, we are out here picketing. We cannot let you cross our line. We don't care if you agree with us or not. One of the challenges of African Americans is that we have a tendency not to handle our own scabs. We are afraid to call someone an Uncle Tom or a house nigga or a sellout. We feel like that's harsh. We want to be understanding of one another as best we can. And so we don't like to throw those terms around very quickly or loosely. But one of the things that's going to have to happen for black people to come into power and get what we deserve is that we're going to have to unionize at a level in which people are afraid to cross us, particularly our own people. That Drew Brees made a statement and was crucified. But my argument is that Herschel Walker made a statement that to me was equally questionable. So if anyone says all lives matter, especially a white person, then we immediately see that as a defensive, racist remark against Black Lives Matter. Okay? Joe Biden is on with Charlemagne the God and says, if you're voting for Trump, you obviously aren't black. Herschel Walker's comment on that is, don't tell me, just because I'm black doesn't mean you could tell me who to vote for. And I'm sorry, but if you can't see the similarities between those two statements, then you're not looking very deeply. Because saying that Black lives matter and then saying all lives matter, to me is very similar to saying you cannot be black and vote for this president. And then someone saying, I'm black, I can vote for whoever I want to. All votes matter. But no one killed Herschel Walker for saying that. And so I think that inevitably, we're going to have to unite at a level in which our own people are afraid to go against what our statement is in fear of their own reputations. I mean, I think the start of it is very similar because I think that, and it's one of the reasons why I'm speaking out, and it's one of the reasons why we're doing these videos and why I'm having these conversations, because I think it begins with spiritual leaders. Trust is the currency of ministry. And so spiritual leaders have a tendency to gain people's trust. So whether we're talking about, and a part of what kind of happened with Malcolm X was Elijah Muhammad, and could he really be trusted beyond, that's a part of the breakdown. If the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had been a bit more honorable, then we may not have, because we're talking about trust. In the same way, it's like Dr. King is attacked morally because people are trying to undermine his trust. Because spiritual leaders have a tendency to end up with the trust of people. And what we saw in the civil rights movement was spiritual leaders and community leaders and athletes coming together. And I think that that's a part of what we're seeing again. And I want to be a part of, I want to have the courage as a spiritual leader to speak out. I don't want to hide behind the blindness of diversity. I don't want to hide behind the kingdom message of oneness and diversity and unity and fail my people. Because I think it's going to take spiritual leaders who have the trust of people. I think it's going to, President Obama is a young person. He's not old. He's going to be around for a minute. So he's going to be a force and a voice to be reckoned with for some time. But I also think that athletes like LeBron James are going to be a significant part of this, because LeBron James is different. We haven't had a basketball player like LeBron James for a while. We can make an argument that Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player to ever live, but we could equally make an argument that we haven't had an NBA player as good as LeBron and as loud as LeBron about the rights of African Americans. It's going to change the game. So I think that we need spiritual leaders. We need these athletes. We need the Jay-Z's. We need the entertainers. We need P. Diddy. We need, because we're at a different point too, in that we have more than we've ever had. African Americans own more than we've ever owned. We have more money than we've ever had. We have more millionaires than we've ever had. So we really are at a point where we really could unify together. Our buying power is significant. Wendy's response is an excellent example of that. Because it wasn't actually Wendy's that donated to Trump's re-election campaign. It was someone who owns Wendy's. This guy who owns Wendy's, he owns some Pizza Huts, he owns some Taco Bells. It's a franchise. He owns some of them. He's the one that made a donation. It's not Wendy's corporate made a donation to Trump. And so they have made statements to try to rectify that and then donate $500,000, donate more than that one individual donated, to try to say, wait a minute, because Black people have buying power. But what's more is that we are dealing with a generation who is not going to tolerate racism. And I think it's going to be a game changer. I think even when it comes to the church, part of the reason why we see white pastors trying to apologize is because they will not be able to access this next generation if they're racists at their heart. And they are. So I think the roads are there. It's kind of like, me in these woods, and I know we talked about maybe us going out into the trails. For us to do that, we'll have to spray down. We'll have to do it early when it's not too hot. But when I'm digging a trail, what happens is I start at a point, I pull the satellite up, I put a dot on that point. Then I put a dot at where I'm trying to get to. And then I start wading in to the woods. And what I really am following is deer trails. So sometimes the deer trails get to a point where I'm just like, okay, it's going in a direction that I don't want to go in. So I have to cut new trails, and even deer trails are very narrow. They're not very high. So there's work to widen them. When you guys get the cameras together, and I'm in the process, I'm getting ready to actually buy another ATV type vehicle, so that I was going to buy it today, but the guy's buying it on Craigslist, but the guy's like going out of town for the weekend. So I'm going to buy it on Monday. You guys will actually be able to get it. It's like a car. So you guys could actually ride behind me and he could be videoing and we can go. When I take you guys down these trails, what you're going to be going down is a trail that was a deer trail that I now have widened to be a 4-wheeler ATV trail. I'm saying that to say, son, that the trails are there. The the civil rights movement laid the trail down. We just didn't necessarily make it wide enough for an ATV to go down it, but it's there. And I think that it's going to take spiritual leaders, it's going to take athletes, it's going to take entertainers. There's going to have to be a Black unity project. And we're going to have some people in it that have the credibility to pull everyone together. I would love for it to be something that Obama decides to do, because I think we could rally around him. He was America's president for 8 years. It'd be great if he was Black people's president for the next 20. And say, okay, Black people, let's unify. And get us to start to build businesses together and bank together and build schools and educate ourselves and build our own neighborhoods and be united together. It doesn't mean that we will totally leave white society. We will still work. We will still shop. We'll be like any minority group. But when that's done, we will support each other and build one another and not fight each other.
It's just very reminiscent of really any, gangster or thug or somebody who's real hard. If they ever were to walk in their grandmother's house, they would always have this instant respect. And it's calling on their older generations to command that respect and for people to have that in a unified community. So I think that's pretty incredible. I think that's great. I don't know how much time we have left on that Odyssey, so I think we should kind of start to wrap it. And my last question to you would be, do you have anything, any type of inspiration for people who are, protesting, donating, doing it the right, anybody who's out there doing it the right way, trying to be heard, being heard, making a change? What do you say to those people to keep them going, to keep everybody because there's this complacency sometimes where, like you said, you feel like you've gotten somewhere. But how do you keep those people energized and inspired? What do you say to them?
I mean, we all know, that faith is the substance of this thing that you hope for. And it's the evidence of this thing that you don't see. And I think that everyone that's protesting has to be careful that their anger at not seeing doesn't overwhelm the faith that they had to be out there in the first place. Because if they could already see it, then it wouldn't require faith. So they're there because of the fact that it doesn't exist. The equality doesn't exist. The justice within the justice system doesn't exist. Fair treatment under the law doesn't exist. Being seen as equal by police, it doesn't exist. So a part of what anyone protesting has to do is they have to be there more, not just based on their anger at what they don't have, but on what they believe that there can be. Because their voice is definitely making a difference. And I think that when the protests turn from peaceful protests and words and statements and chanting and marching to fires and burning and looting, is when we fluctuate kind of between faith and fear, or belief or an anger. And it's very easy for your faith that this can happen to turn into a fear that it's never going to happen. Your belief of what we can be to turn into an anger at what we are. And my word would be, keep the faith. A part of my gut reaction to all of this has been, yeah, we need to unify with each other, and Black people need to stick together. And maybe we don't need to live with everybody else. But the generation that's protesting is saying, no, we should. And I think it's going to take both together. I think it's going to take my generation's wise cynicism mixed with your generation's hopeful optimism to get us to where we need to get to. Because I do think that we should be accepted and we should be treated equally. But I just think that to get there, we have to be united with each other first. It's difficult to be respected when we're just so separated. It's about being empowered together. And we have to start by trusting each other and caring about each other and believing in each other. So that's the start of it.